I'm Tom from Do-It-Yourself Home Automation, and it was announced earlier this month that Google is going to try to buy Fitbit. So they buy the entire company for about $2.1 billion, it was reported. And, obviously these big deals have to be reviewed, so there's a chance it couldn't go through. But if it does go through, then Google will officially own Fitbit's products and all of its data and relationships. So this is really interesting for the home tech market and especially for the wearables market in a lot of different ways. And one of them is that, basically this is showing that smartwatches and wearable technologies are a play for big companies for the most part. Because really, when we saw smartwatches starting out, it was these tiny companies that, Pebble was one of the early ones that got started on Kickstarter. Fitbit entered that piece of the industry, 5 or 6 years ago. And there's a lot of these smaller companies making smartwatches, and probably you'll continue to see some of those. But really, now that Google's entered the fray, it's all sort of concentrated in three big players, which is Apple with their Apple Watch, and then Samsung with the Gear Watch, and now Google with the Fitbit. This is sort of showing that I think these devices really need an ecosystem around them. And that's something I think Fitbit has struggled to do, is really build out its apps and make those a key part of the experience. And obviously working with Google or being part of Google, they'll be able to bring Google's Android connections and developer connections there into the mix, and that'll hopefully yield much better apps for these kinds of watches. So that's interesting. I think we're seeing that really this is something that only big companies are going to be doing, and Fitbit, even valued at $2 billion, is not big enough to really succeed in that market. And that's something I talked about a little bit before with their move to premium, how I think they were shifting away from a business model around selling you hardware and more towards one that's based on services and analytics. And really, that way it sort of makes sense to work with Google, to become part of Google, because, that's something Google does really well. That's sort of their whole business model. And Google said they're not going to use the Fitbit data for ads, which is interesting. That's sort of the other big piece to Fitbit, is that not only do they have the devices and the services that a lot of people use on a day-to-day basis, but they're also obviously been tracking millions of people for the last decade or so. I got my first Fitbit almost 10 years ago now. So they have basically every step I've taken literally over the last 10 years somewhere in a database, heart rate data, sleep data. So it's very valuable data. But Google says, I think probably intelligently from a privacy standpoint, they're not going to use that to, sell you ads. So probably they will be able to use it, though, to train AI models and get a better sense internally of who their users are, and hone their products and that kind of thing. So obviously buying that data with Fitbit is going to be something that's going to prove helpful to Google, even if they're not directly using it to do ad sales. And the final piece that's been talked about a little bit is, what else does Google get in this deal? I think, the relationships with other big companies, because Fitbit has really tried to tie in to other big companies and health insurance companies and that kind of thing. So that's been a topic where people, I think there was a Time Magazine article speculating about, well, maybe Fitbit really just wants those healthcare connections, or Google rather wants those healthcare connections that Fitbit has. And so in buying them, they're accessing that market, and that's an area they can start to go into more in the future. But if this deal goes through, I think what we can expect as users of Fitbit is, I would imagine that Google will probably keep them as sort of an autonomous group within the company and keep the brand alive. That's what they did with Nest, which is a Google product. And, your Nest camera is still branded as Nest. The Nest thermostat is still branded separately. But again, those are all tied into Google's ecosystem. So they benefit from having Google's cloud behind them. They benefit from the software development and hardware development experience now that Google has. So I think it's a good overall addition there. And what I'm most excited about is, again, the integrations with apps. So I think, Fitbit, as much as they've tried, like with my Ionic here, or rather my Versa here, and my Ionic I have gone into before, they have some apps, but it really doesn't have the ecosystem that even an Apple Watch or the Samsung Gear Watch have. So I think tying into Google and Android will really help that. And then just better analytics. Fitbit obviously is a much smaller company, so they don't have all of the expertise in doing data analytics. So I think, with Google on board, and obviously there'll be some kind of crosstalk between the teams there, I think you'll see what we saw with Nest, which is that you really start to get better AI capabilities, better analytics capabilities, and it's just more integrated into your overall experience if you already use Google products or you already use Android. So hopefully the syncing issues that have plagued a lot of Fitbit watches on Android phones will be addressed more quickly, and they just have more resources available for building out those interconnections. So I'm excited. I think it's probably a good thing. It sort of highlights trends that I had been looking at for a while in the industry, of the move away from hardware and more towards a service model with these kinds of devices. So I'm excited. I hope it does go through, and I'll continue to report on any changes in the watch and the user experience itself. If you found this helpful in any way, please subscribe to my channel. It really helps.